Der Geruch von verbranntem Porzellan liegt in der Luft, als ich die Überreste meiner kostbarsten Erinnerung in den Händen halte. Die Teetasse meiner Mutter, oder was davon übrig ist, zerbröckelt zwischen meinen Fingern wie Asche. Jedes Fragment ein Stich ins Herz. »Es war ein Unfall, Jana«, säuselt Helen von der Küchentür aus. Ihre Stimme trieft vor falscher Besorgnis. Ich wollte nur abstauben, da ist sie mir aus der Hand geglitten. Ich starre auf die Scherben. Die handgemalten Rosen, die meine Mutter so geliebt hatte, sind geschwärzt. Der Mikrowellenbrand war kein Zufall. Die Tasse wurde absichtlich dort hineingestellt. »Du lügst«, sage ich leise, ohne aufzublicken. Meine Finger zittern. »Wie bitte?« Helens Ton wird schärfer. »Ich bin deine Schwiegermutter. Wie kannst du es wagen, mich eine Lügnerin zu nennen?« Mark kommt herein, sein Gesicht besorgt. »Was ist denn hier los?« »Deine Frau beschuldigt mich grundlos«, klagt Helen sofort. »Dabei war es ein simpler Unfall. Ich schaue zu meinem Mann auf, suche in seinen Augen nach Verständnis. Mark, sieh dir das an. Die Tasse wurde in der Mikrowelle zerstört. Das einzige Erinnerungsstück, das ich noch von Mama hatte.« Er seufzt schwer. »Jana, bist du dir sicher? Mama würde so etwas nie tun.« In diesem Moment höre ich Emily auf der Treppe. Meine 14-jährige Tochter bleibt wie angewurzelt stehen, als sie die Spannung im Raum spürt. »Was ist passiert?« fragt sie leise. »Nichts, Schätzchen«, antwortet Helen schnell. »Nur ein kleines Missgeschick.« Ich stehe auf, die verkohlten Überreste noch immer in der Hand. »Nein, Emily, das war kein Missgeschick. Das war Absicht.« Helen lacht gekünstelt. »Oh, bitte, jetzt werd nicht melodramatisch. Es war eine alte Tasse. Es war das letzte Geschenk meiner sterbenden Mutter«, sage ich mit erstickter Stimme. Emily kommt zu mir, legt ihre Hand auf meinen Arm. In ihren Augen sehe ich, dass sie versteht. Sie hat die kleinen Nadelstiche ihrer Großmutter auch schon zu spüren bekommen. Ich schaue in den Spiegel über der Kommode. Meine Augen sind rot, aber trocken. Etwas in mir ist zerbrochen, genau wie diese Tasse. Aber aus den Scherben wächst etwas Neues. Eine kalte, klare Entschlossenheit. Helen mag denken, sie hätte gewonnen, aber sie hat keine Ahnung, was sie gerade in Gang gesetzt hat. »Du solltest dich bei Mama entschuldigen«, sagt Mark beim Abendessen, während er mechanisch in seinen Nudeln herumstochert. Sie ist wirklich aufgebracht über die Anschuldigung. Ich lasse meine Gabel sinken und starre ihn ungläubig an. Ich soll mich entschuldigen? Emily sitzt zwischen uns. Ihr Blick wandert nervös hin und her. Die Spannung im Raum ist so dick, dass man sie schneiden könnte. »Jana, bitte. Du weißt, wie sensibel sie ist. Sie würde nie absichtlich...« »Genau das ist das Problem, Mark«, unterbreche ich ihn. »Du siehst nie, was sie tut. Oder willst es nicht sehen.« Er schiebt seinen Teller weg. »Sie ist meine Mutter. Und ich bin deine Frau«, sage ich leise. Aber das scheint manchmal weniger zu bedeuten. Emily steht abrupt auf. Ich gehe in mein Zimmer. »Schatz, bleib«, sage ich, aber sie schüttelt den Kopf. Ihr streitet sowieso nur wieder. Als sie weg ist, lehnt Mark sich zurück und seufzt. »Siehst du, was du anrichtest? Die Familie zerbricht.« »Was ich anrichte?« Meine Stimme zittert vor unterdrückter Wut. »Deine Mutter zerstört systematisch alles, was mir wichtig ist, und du stehst daneben und schaust zu. Das ist übertrieben.« Das Telefon klingelt. Mark nimmt ab. Sein Gesicht erhellt sich. »Mama! Ja, natürlich kannst du vorbeikommen.« Mein Magen verkrampft sich. Helen wird in einer Stunde hier sein, angeblich um Frieden zu stiften. In Wirklichkeit wird sie wieder ihre subtilen Nadeln setzen und Mark wird blind dafür sein. Ich stehe auf und beginne, den Tisch abzuräumen. Dabei fällt mein Blick auf das Familienporträt an der Wand, ein Geschenk von Helen. Darauf steht sie zwischen Mark und Emily, während ich am Rand stehe, fast außerhalb des Bilderrahmens. Plötzlich höre ich Emily oben telefonieren. »Ja, Oma, ich weiß. Nein, Mama ist manchmal wirklich schwierig.« Ich erstarre. Die Worte treffen mich wie ein Schlag. Helen hat bereits begonnen, meine eigene Tochter gegen mich aufzubringen. Mark legt von hinten seine Hände auf meine Schultern. »Siehst du? Mama versucht nur zu helfen. Lass uns heute Abend einen Neuanfang machen.« Ich nicke mechanisch, aber in mir wächst eine eisige Entschlossenheit. Helen mag denken, sie hätte alle Fäden in der Hand. Aber sie hat keine Ahnung, wozu eine Mutter fähig ist, die ihre Familie beschützt. Der Abend wird interessant werden. Ich stehe vor Emilys Zimmer, die Hand erhoben zum Klopfen, als ich Helens Stimme höre. »Deine Mutter war schon immer kompliziert, Liebes. Weißt du, dass sie früher Therapie brauchte, wegen ihrer Aggressionen? Mein Herz setzt einen Schlag aus. Diese Lüge ist so geschickt gewählt, dass sie perfekt zu meiner aktuellen Wut passt. Aber Mama ist doch gar nicht aggressiv, höre ich Emily antworten, doch ihre Stimme klingt unsicher. Oh, Schatz, du bist zu jung, um dich an die schlimmen Zeiten zu erinnern. Ich mache mir solche Sorgen um dich. Ich stoße die Tür auf. Helen sitzt auf Emilys Bett, eine Hand tröstend auf dem Knie meiner Tochter. Ihr überraschter Gesichtsausdruck verwandelt sich blitzschnell in mitleidiges Bedauern. Jana, Liebes, wir haben uns nur unterhalten. Raus, sage ich leise. Sofort. Emily springt auf. Mama, wir haben nur... Emily, unterbreche ich sie, ohne den Blick von Helen zu nehmen. Geh bitte nach unten zu deinem Vater. Aber jetzt. Als Emily gegangen ist, steht Helen langsam auf. Du bestätigst gerade alles, was ich gesagt habe. Diese Kontrolle, diese Aggression. Ich weiß genau, was du versuchst, sage ich. Meine Stimme zittert vor unterdrückter Wut. Erst zerstörst du meine Erinnerungen. Jetzt willst du mir meine Tochter nehmen. Helen seufzt theatralisch. Mark hatte recht. Du brauchst wirklich wieder professionelle Hilfe. In diesem Moment höre ich ein Geräusch an der Tür. Emily steht dort, bleich im Gesicht, ihr Handy in der Hand. Emily, sagt Helen zuckersüß, ich hab dir doch gesagt, du sollst... Ich hab alles aufgenommen, unterbricht Emily sie. Ihre Stimme ist dünn, aber fest. Von Anfang an, als du angefangen hast, diese Lügen über Mama zu erzählen. Helens Gesicht verändert sich. Die mitleidige Maske fällt, enthüllt etwas Hartes, Kaltes darunter. Gib mir das Telefon, befiehlt sie. Emily weicht zurück. Nein, ich schicke die Aufnahme gerade an Papa. Für einen Moment sieht Helen aus, als wolle sie sich auf Emily stürzen. Dann sammelt sie sich, richtet ihre Bluse und lächelt eisig. Niemand wird dir glauben, sagt sie sanft. Ich bin die besorgte Großmutter. Du bist ein verwöhntes Teenager-Mädchen, das seine Aufnahmen manipuliert hat. Sie geht zur Tür, dreht sich noch einmal um. Übrigens, Jana, Mark hat mir erzählt, dass er über eine Beförderung in einer anderen Stadt nachdenkt. Vielleicht solltest du dich darauf konzentrieren, statt hier Familiendrama zu inszenieren. Als sie weg ist, umarmt Emily mich fest. Es tut mir so leid, Mama. Ich wusste nicht. Ich dachte... Ich halte sie, aber meine Gedanken rasen. Eine andere Stadt? Helen will uns auseinandertreiben. Und wenn ich nicht schnell handle, wird sie damit durchkommen. Die Aufnahme spielt sich in einer Endlosschleife in meinem Kopf ab, während ich auf Mark warte. Emilys Stimme, Helens süßes Gift, die Drohung einer Beförderung, die unsere Familie entwurzeln würde. Das Klicken des Schlüssels in der Haustür reißt mich aus meinen Gedanken. Mark kommt herein, seine Aktentasche noch in der Hand. »Du bist spät«, sage ich leise. Er vermeidet meinen Blick. »Hatte noch ein wichtiges Meeting. Mit dem Personalchef? Wegen der Beförderung?« Seine Hand verkrampft sich um den Griff der Aktentasche. »Woher weißt du?« »Deine Mutter hat es mir erzählt. Bevor oder nachdem sie versucht hat, unsere Tochter gegen mich aufzuhetzen.« Er stellt die Tasche ab, sein Gesicht verschlossen. »Emily hat mir die Aufnahme geschickt. Sie ist manipuliert, Jana. Das muss sie sein.« »Natürlich, weil deine Mutter ja nie...« »Hör auf«, schneidet er mir das Wort ab. »Du siehst überall Verschwörungen. Die Beförderung ist eine große Chance. Für uns alle. Eine Chance, die zufällig 1000 Kilometer von hier entfernt ist? Wo Helen keinen Einfluss mehr auf Emily hätte?« Marks Telefon vibriert. »Helen. Natürlich.« Er geht nicht ran, aber seine Hand zuckt zum Gerät. »Sie wird nicht aufhören«, sage ich. »Erst die Tasse, dann Emily, jetzt willst du uns wegbringen.« »Das ist doch Wahnsinn! Du klingst wie...« Er bricht ab, aber ich höre die unausgesprochenen Worte. Wie eine Verrückte. In diesem Moment kommt Lisa, Davids Frau, durch die offene Tür. Ihr Gesicht ist aschfahl. »Tut mir leid, ich...« »Die Tür war offen«, stammelt sie. »Jana, ich muss mit dir reden. Es geht um Helen.« Mark macht einen Schritt auf sie zu. »Lisa, das ist kein guter Zeitpunkt.« »Sie hat es bei David auch getan«, platzt Lisa heraus. »Vor Jahren. Die gleichen Manipulationen, die gleichen Lügen, bis er fast seinen Job verloren hätte. Weil er sich geweigert hat, wegzuziehen.« Die Stille im Raum ist ohrenbetäubend. Mark steht wie versteinert. David würde nie, beginnt er. Ruf ihn an, unterbricht Lisa ihn. Frag ihn selbst. Ich halte das nicht mehr aus. Diese Frau zerstört systematisch jeden, der sich ihr in den Weg stellt. Marks Telefon vibriert erneut. Helen. Immer. Helen. Er starrt auf das Display, seine Hand zittert. Zum ersten Mal sehe ich einen Riss in seiner blindgläubigen Loyalität. Was willst du tun? Frage ich leise. Er hebt den Blick und ich erkenne den gleichen Kampf in seinen Augen, den ich seit Wochen führe. Ich weiß es nicht, flüstert er. Ich weiß es wirklich nicht. Helens 70. Geburtstag, sagt Lisa und legt die Einladung auf den Küchentisch. Die perfekte Gelegenheit. Ich starre auf das cremefarbene Papier. Die geschwungene Schrift verkündet eine große Familienfeier im Restaurant La Maison. Helens Lieblingsort für ihre kleinen Inszenierungen. David hat alle alten Briefe aufbewahrt, fährt Lisa fort. Die manipulativen Nachrichten, die Drohungen, sogar Kontoauszüge, die beweisen, wie sie sein Geschäft sabotiert hat. Mark sitzt schweigend daneben, sein Gesicht aschfahl. Seit Lisas Enthüllung vor 3 Tagen hat er kaum gesprochen. Sie wird es wieder tun, sage ich leise. Mit Emily, mit uns allen. Nicht, wenn wir sie vorher stoppen, sagt Lisa. Die ganze Familie wird da sein. Alle werden die Wahrheit erfahren. Emily kommt herein, ihre Augen rot vom Weinen. Oma hat gerade angerufen. Sie will, dass ich bei der Feier eine Rede halte, über unsere besondere Beziehung. Marks Kopf schnellt hoch. Was? Sie sagte, ich soll erzählen, wie Mama versucht, uns auseinanderzubringen. Die Stille im Raum ist erstickend. Mark steht auf, seine Hände zittern. Das reicht, sagt er tonlos. Das verdammte Spiel muss aufhören. Sein Handy klingelt. Helen. Diesmal drückt er sie weg. Die Feier, sagt Lisa. Wir haben alle Beweise. David wird sprechen. Ich auch. Und Emily? Frage ich. Helen wird sie benutzen, um uns zu diskreditieren. Emily richtet sich auf. Nein, wird sie nicht. Ich werde die Wahrheit sagen. Die ganze Wahrheit. Mark nimmt seine Tochter in den Arm. Zum ersten Mal seit Tagen sieht er wie er selbst aus. Wir müssen vorsichtig sein, sage ich. Helen ist wie ein verwundetes Tier. Am gefährlichsten, wenn sie in die Enge getrieben wird. Das Telefon klingelt wieder. Diesmal ist es David. Sie weiß etwas, sagt er ohne Umschweife. Sie hat alte Fotos ausgegraben. Von dir, Jana. Von vor der Therapie. Mein Magen verkrampft sich. Die dunkle Zeit nach dem Tod meiner Mutter. Helen hatte mich damals in der Klinik besucht. Mit einer Kamera. Die Fotos sind manipuliert, fährt David fort. Aber sie wird sie benutzen, um dich zu zerstören. Mark greift nach meiner Hand. Seine Augen sind hart. Dann werden wir sie zuerst zerstören, sagt er. Emily nickt entschlossen. Lisa lächelt grimmig. Die Einladung liegt zwischen uns wie eine Kriegserklärung. In 2 Wochen wird Helen ihren großen Auftritt haben. Sie ahnt nicht, dass es ihr letzter sein wird. La Maison glitzert im Abendlicht, als wäre nichts geschehen. Helen sitzt am Kopfende der langen Tafel, strahlend wie eine Königin bei Hofe. Die manipulierten Fotos von mir liegen wie eine Waffe in ihrer Handtasche. David hat mich gewarnt. Emily steht auf, ihre Rede in zitternden Händen. Unser Plan war perfekt. Erst Emily, dann David mit seinen Beweisen, dann ich. Aber Helen lächelt zu selbstsicher. Bevor meine geliebte Enkelin spricht, unterbricht Helen sanft, möchte ich etwas zeigen, etwas, das mir große Sorgen bereitet. Mein Herz setzt aus. Nicht jetzt, nicht vor Emily. Aber es kommt schlimmer. Mark, sagt Helen und zieht einen Brief hervor. Dieser Brief ist von Janas Therapeuten, von vor einer Woche. Mark erstarrt neben mir. Was? Gefälscht, sage ich sofort, aber meine Stimme klingt dünn. Der Therapeut bestätigt Janas instabile Tendenzen, fährt Helen fort. Ihre Wahnvorstellungen über mich, ihre Rachefantasien. Emily lässt ihre Rede fallen. Mama? Es ist nicht wahr, sage ich, aber der Raum dreht sich. Der Brief sieht echt aus. Die Unterschrift, das Praxislogo. David steht auf. Helen, es reicht. Oh, David. Helen seufzt theatralisch. Deine Geschäftsprobleme waren deine eigene Schuld. Diese Dokumente hier beweisen es. Sie zieht weitere Papiere hervor. Davids Gesicht wird aschfahl. Woher hast du? Ich habe meine Quellen, lächelt Helen. So wie ich weiß, dass Lisa eine Affäre hat. Lisa japst. David wirbelt zu ihr herum. Der sorgfältig geplante Abend zerfällt vor meinen Augen. Helen hat jeden einzelnen von uns ausspioniert, hat Geheimnisse gesammelt wie giftige Perlen. Emily, sage ich verzweifelt, du weißt, dass sie lügt. Aber Emily weicht zurück, Tränen in den Augen. Mark starrt auf den Brief des Therapeuten, als würde er die Wahrheit darin finden. Helen erhebt sich, majestätisch wie immer. Ich tue das nur, weil ich euch alle liebe, weil diese Familie Hilfe braucht, echte Hilfe. Ich sehe die Gesichter um mich herum. Zweifel, Misstrauen, Verwirrung. Helen hat gewonnen. Mit einer einzigen, präzisen Operation hat sie uns alle voneinander getrennt. Ich stehe auf, meine Beine wie Blei. Der Ausgang scheint meilenweit entfernt. »Jana«, ruft Helen mir nach, ihre Stimme voller falscher Sorge. »Bleib doch, lass uns dir helfen.« Aber ich gehe weiter, einen Schritt nach dem anderen. Draußen in der Dunkelheit warte ich auf Tränen, die nicht kommen. 3 Tage nach der Geburtstagsfeier finde ich Helen in ihrem Haus. Sie sitzt in ihrem Lieblingsstuhl, sortiert Fotos in ein Album und lächelt, als hätte sie mich erwartet. »Du hast alles zerstört«, sage ich leise. »Ich habe die Familie beschützt, vor dir.« Sie klebt ein Foto ein. Es zeigt Mark als Kind in ihren Armen. »Du warst schon immer das Problem. Wie hast du den Brief gefälscht?« »Oh, das war einfach. Dein alter Therapeut ist jetzt im Ruhestand. Seine Praxis wurde übernommen. Die neue Ärztin, nun, sie war sehr verständnisvoll.« Meine Hände zittern. Und Lisas angebliche Affäre? Die war nicht gefälscht. Helen lächelt dünn. Manchmal muss man nur die richtigen Wahrheiten im richtigen Moment enthüllen. Ein Geräusch an der Tür. Emily steht dort, blass, aber entschlossen. Helens Lächeln wird breiter. »Liebling, komm zu.« »Ich habe alles aufgenommen«, unterbricht Emily sie. »Wieder. Und diesmal habe ich es direkt an Papa geschickt.« Helens Hand erstarrt über dem Fotoalbum. »Du lügst.« »Wie du?« Emily tritt näher. »Ich habe auch die Briefe gefunden, in deinem Arbeitszimmer. Die echten Briefe von Mamas Therapeuten, die beweisen, dass du alles gefälscht hast.« Schritte auf der Veranda. Mark erscheint im Türrahmen, David hinter ihm. Ihre Gesichter sind hart. »Es ist vorbei, Mama«, sagt Mark. Helen steht auf. Das Album fällt zu Boden. Fotos verstreuen sich wie herbstliche Blätter. »Ihr versteht nicht«, und flüstert sie. »Ich tue das alles nur für euch. Diese Familie braucht mich.« »Nein«, sagt David. »Diese Familie braucht Heilung, von dir. Ihr undankbaren...« Helen greift nach ihrer Handtasche, nach den gefälschten Fotos, ihrer letzten Waffe. Aber Emily ist schneller. Sie hebt ein Foto vom Boden auf. Ist das Oma als Kind? Helen erstarrt. Das Foto zeigt ein kleines Mädchen, einsam an einem großen Tisch. Wie Emily bei der Geburtstagsfeier. »Du wiederholst einfach nur, was man dir angetan hat«, sage ich leise. »Aber es endet hier.« Helens Maske zerbricht. Für einen Moment sehe ich das verängstigte Kind hinter der manipulativen Königin. »Geht«, flüstert sie. »Geht alle.« Mark nimmt meine Hand. Emily greift nach der anderen. David nickt uns zu. Als wir gehen, höre ich Helen schluchzen. Zum ersten Mal sind es echte Tränen. Draußen scheint die Sonne. Emily lächelt zu mir auf. »Lass uns nach Hause gehen, Mama.« Emily legt das letzte von Helens Tagebüchern beiseite. Ihre Augen sind rot vom Lesen. »Sie war wie ich«, sagt sie leise. »Allein an diesem großen Tisch. Ihre Mutter war genau wie sie. Ich setze mich neben sie auf ihr Bett. Die Tagebücher hatte David in Helens Haus gefunden, versteckt unter losen Dielen. Eine Chronik der Einsamkeit, der verzweifelten Suche nach Kontrolle. »Macht es das besser?«, frage ich. »Was sie uns angetan hat?« Emily schüttelt den Kopf. »Nein, aber es macht es verständlicher.« Mark erscheint in der Tür, ein zerknitterter Brief in der Hand. »Sie ist in Therapie«, sagt er. »Freiwillig.« Ich nicke langsam. Der Geschmack der Rache hat sich in etwas Komplexeres verwandelt. Nicht süß, nicht bitter. Einfach real. »Lisa und David kommen zum Abendessen«, sagt Mark. »David hat einen neuen Job gefunden. Einen besseren.« »Und Lisa?«, fragt Emily. »Sie reden wieder miteinander, über alles.« Mark zögert. »Manchmal braucht es einen Zusammenbruch, damit etwas heilen kann.« Ich stehe auf und gehe zum Fenster. Die zerbrochene Tasse meiner Mutter steht dort, kunstvolle geklebt. Nicht perfekt, aber ganz. Emily hat sie repariert mit einer japanischen Technik, die goldene Linien verwendet, um die Brüche zu betonen, statt sie zu verstecken. Werden wir Oma je wiedersehen? Fragt Emily. Vielleicht, sagt Mark, wenn sie wirklich bereit ist, sich zu ändern. Ich berühre die goldenen Linien der Tasse. Manchmal ist das Zerbrochene stärker, wenn es wieder zusammengefügt wird. Emily kommt zu mir, lehnt sich an meine Schulter. Mark legt seine Arme um uns beide. Draußen geht die Sonne unter, taucht alles in warmes Gold. Wie die Linien in der gebrochenen Tasse. Wie die Wahrheit, die endlich ans Licht gekommen ist. Die Wunden sind noch da. Aber sie definieren uns nicht mehr. Sie zeigen nur, wie weit wir gekommen sind.
Despite the heavy rain, Tom paid it no mind and instead focused on driving to his important client. He increased the speed of the wipers to improve his visibility on the road. A question persisted in his mind. What have I accomplished in my life? He struggled to recall any happy memories at that moment, feeling weighed down by the exhaustion of working as a cab driver, coupled with the constant pressure from his irate manager. From the very beginning of his employment with the company, Tom's manager had never taken a liking to him. This was perhaps the reason why he had been assigned an old cab that sounded like it needed maintenance a long time ago. As he sat at a traffic light, Tom couldn't help but question his life choices. He thought to himself, what am I doing with my life? If only I had pursued a degree, I wouldn't be stuck sitting behind the wheel all day, having to be nice to everyone. As soon as the traffic light turned green, Tom stepped on the gas. He heard strange noises coming from under the hood of his car. It was clear that there was an issue with the engine, and he knew that he would be held responsible and forced to cover the expenses. Tom was filled with frustration at the thought of this. He knew he had limited options as a newcomer in the city with few connections. As Tom drove on, sad thoughts began to creep up on him. He couldn't shake off the memory of how the dispatcher always favored their own friends and gave them the best clients, leaving Tom with nothing but cheap rides. The unfairness of it all weighed heavily on him. After driving a few blocks, Tom decided to take a shortcut and turn into an alleyway. While navigating through the narrow path, a pregnant woman suddenly appeared in front of his car, blocking his way. She waved her hands frantically, causing Tom to slam on the brakes and shout in confusion and frustration. What the heck are you doing? Are you out of your mind? Tom jumped out of his car and continued to yell at the woman, scolding her for crossing the street in front of his vehicle. However, as the woman began to sob uncontrollably, Tom realized that he may have been too harsh with his words. He watched as the woman sat on the curb, still crying, and felt a pang of regret for his outburst. Tom realized that he had been too quick to judge her actions. He considered the possibility that she may have been in a hurry or experiencing contractions, which could have caused her to cross the street without thinking. He wanted to do something, but he was also concerned about arriving late to pick up his important client. In an attempt to make amends, Tom asked the woman to get into his car. Please, get in. You'll get completely soaked out here. It doesn't look like the rain is going to stop anytime soon. As the pregnant woman got into the car, she looked at Tom with suspicion, giving him an unsettling, cold stare. Tom tried to break the ice by introducing himself. I'm Tom, a cab driver. However, the woman's unexpected response caught him off guard. I'm Natalie, ex-convict. Tom felt a shiver run down his spine as he heard the words. He couldn't believe that he was now transporting a former convict in his cab. Natalie noticed Tom's nervousness and tried to lighten the mood, telling him not to worry. Relax, I said I was an ex-convict. There's nothing wrong with that, unless you think women can be criminals. Tom responded with a smile. Thanks, Natalie. I really hope so too. It's been a tough ride lately. Natalie nodded sympathetically and then said, You know, sometimes it's the tough rides that make us stronger. They shape us into who we are and lead us to where we need to be. Tom felt a sense of comfort and inspiration from Natalie's words. Maybe there was something more to this encounter than just a chance meeting on a rainy day. As he continued driving towards his important client, Tom felt a renewed sense of hope and determination. Despite the circumstances of his upbringing, Tom had become accustomed to handling things independently and was not overly concerned about his current situation. He had spent his entire life without the support of his parents and had grown up in an orphanage where he did not receive affection from caregivers or develop close relationships with peers. This upbringing had taught him to manage things alone and without the aid of friends or family. Tom was raised in a small-town orphanage and had no knowledge of life beyond its confines. He aspired to leave the place someday and seek a welcoming and affectionate environment. However, he was unsure where to go since he lacked information about his relatives, and even if he had any, they seemed indifferent to him. Tom was told that he was abandoned as a baby, so he didn't feel the need to search for any relatives. His longing for love was merely a childhood fantasy. He took advantage of the free driving school offered by the orphanage and obtained his driving license, knowing that it would be his main source of income. After leaving the small town, Tom relocated to a city in hopes of finding a job and settling there. Despite visiting various employment agencies, he was only able to secure a position as a cab driver with a conceited boss, Mr. Garcia. Tom didn't voice his discontent with the job, but he despised the idea of encountering his boss at work. One day, during working hours, the president of the company, who usually stayed away from the office and was often seen with his family, paid a visit. Tom admired how the president, Mr. Wilson, carried himself in public. Despite his high position, he was modest and respectable. The employees were discussing the purchase of oil for the cabs when Tom mentioned that he had knowledge about oils. This was because he was assigned a car with an oil leak and he had to frequently top up the oil, giving him insight into the matter. The president noticed it and smiled at Tom. "What's your name, son?" Mr. Wilson asked. "My name is Tom Higgins, sir. I'd like to have a word with you after the meeting. Come to my office." From then on, Tom and the president were often seen chatting and laughing, but this made the manager, Mr. Garcia, jealous and he sought revenge. However, Tom had done nothing wrong and was doing his job well, so there wasn't much the manager could do to punish him. Tom was sitting behind the wheel and driving his pregnant passenger, God knows where. He was anxious about the important client that was waiting for him. It was someone Mr. Garcia asked to make sure he picked up on time. Tom stopped thinking and decided to pass the time faster as he drove through the traffic. He turned to his passenger and said, "That's quite a baby bump." "Yeah, I'm expecting next month," she smiled. "I feel like I'll never see my babies," Tom sighed. "Why do you say so?" Natalie asked. "I've seen so much injustice that I just can't trust people anymore." They rode in silence for a while and Natalie spoke up. "Well, your whole life is ahead of you, and you just have to believe something. All it takes is a wish to change your life," she said and fell silent again. Tom felt a surge of nostalgia and a wave of emotions hit him. He couldn't pinpoint any specific memories that made him feel nostalgic, but it was something that arose after hearing Natalie's words. The idea of making a change in his life suddenly felt appealing to him after a long time. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had encouraged him to have faith and pursue his wishes. He felt a sense of positivity and grinned, catching Natalie's smile in the rearview mirror. "Thank you for your kind words," Tom said. Natalie smiled and offered to pay for the ride once they arrived at their destination. When she told Tom the address, he let out a deep sigh, realizing it was quite a distance. But he reassured her, saying, "Don't worry about paying. I'll take you where you need to go. I understand that you may not have the money to pay up front. I've had passengers before who said they would pay at the end of the ride, only to disappear without paying." Natalie nodded and replied, "Sure, I understand. And no worries, I didn't mean to snap at you. It's just that sometimes people judge me based on my past and it's frustrating." Tom nodded and apologized again for making assumptions. The rest of the ride was quiet, but the tension between them had dissipated. Tom quipped, "Looks like we're at a bank. I hope you're not here to rob it." He kept his promise and didn't charge her for the ride, taking into consideration that she recently got out of prison and probably had other expenses to cover. As soon as he emerged onto the highway, Tom felt a sinking feeling in his stomach as he realized he would be late for the pickup now. He knew Mr. Garcia would be furious with him for being tardy, and he fretted that he might be reported to the president and subsequently fired. When he finally arrived to pick up a man in a suit, the passenger gave Tom a stern look and checked his watch before staring at him through the rearview mirror, but didn't say anything. Tom was certain that he would be reported for his lateness. When Tom arrived at the office in the evening, he found Mr. Garcia in a state of fury. "You were late for the pickup," Mr. Garcia shouted. I apologize, Mr. Garcia. The traffic was terrible and my car was having some issues, Tom tried to explain. Mr. Garcia didn't want to cut to the chase. He wanted to indulge in his ego, and he took his time redoing his tie while looking at himself in the mirror. The silence was unbearable for Tom. You know that the cab has a satellite tracker, right? I just love that piece of gadget. It makes my job a lot easier. What are you talking about, Mr. Garcia? Tom looked bewildered. He genuinely had no idea that there was a tracker in the cab. I'm talking about the route you took. That was quite a detour. Mr. Garcia chuckled. What did you do at the bank? Did you deposit the millions you're earning? Mr. Garcia kept pushing. Tom was frightened. He was wondering if something bad happened at the bank, if he was really robbed or something. Mr. Garcia, did anything bad happen? Tom asked. That's bad enough to punish you, Mr. Garcia replied. I'm just wondering how I can do that so that you remember it for a while. He smiled. Can I pay a fine instead? I promise it won't happen again, Tom pleaded. You have the guts to tell me what to do now, huh? Mr. Garcia frowned. You can get your stuff from the cab and get the heck out, he yelled out. Sir, I've always taken the cheap rides and never complained. I did my job well. Please don't kick me out now. I was just giving a ride to someone in need. She was pregnant. Tom started to explain, but Mr. Garcia cut him off. Enough of your fairy tales. I don't care what you did. You were doing your personal things and that doesn't fly in this company, he replied. This week's paycheck will go to cover the losses. Mr. Garcia finished and walked out. What losses, sir? Tom didn't get any answer. He didn't know what to do. He thought of what Natalie said about changing your life. This wasn't what he expected. He headed to the parking lot to retrieve his belongings from the cab, and while he was gathering his things, he spotted a flip phone lying on the backseat. Assuming one of his passengers had left it behind, he picked it up, planning to return it to its rightful owner when they contacted him. As he wandered through the windy streets feeling lost, he pondered what the future held for him. Without any other skills or connections, he was unsure where to begin looking for a new job. Standing at the bus stop, he felt a sense of loneliness amidst the bustling city. Eventually, he arrived home late at night, exhausted. After fixing himself a sandwich, he heard a knock at his door. Puzzled, as he wasn't expecting any visitors at that hour, he wondered who it could be. When he opened the door, he realized it was an old lady who lived next door. She was panting. Hi, I'm sorry for bothering you this late. Could you help me get my kitten from that tree over there? She asked, breathing heavily. Tom was amused at how many weird things were happening today. He quickly got dressed and went outside. He didn't ask any questions and went climbing up the tree right away. What's her name? Tom shouted from the tree. It's Amigo, Mrs. Bennett shouted back. He located the meowing kitten and cuddled it. Mrs. Bennett was looking up from the ground, beaming. God bless you, Tom. Thank you so much. She was really happy. Then she invited Tom to her apartment. I'm sorry for waking you up this late, and again, thank you so much. She kept thanking him profusely. You probably have to wake up early for work. It's all good, Mrs. Bennett. I wasn't sleeping. I actually got fired from work today and was about to have my dinner, Tom replied. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Hold on, I've got some stew for you. Mrs. Bennett went to the kitchen and started to put the food on the plate. Thank you, Mrs. Bennett. You don't really have to. Tom tried to talk her out, but he knew she was determined to feed him. Tom's smile persisted on his face as he realized he had never experienced such a pleasant conversation before. He was so caught up in the moment that he even forgot he had lost his job earlier that day. Mrs. Bennett bustled around the stove, preparing his dinner with evident joy. Once the plate of steaming stew was placed in front of him, Tom listened as Mrs. Bennett shared their story of losing her husband 3 months prior. Although the couple had never had children, they had been happily married for half a century. Mrs. Bennett became emotional as she reminisced about her late husband, confessing to Tom that she had been struggling to sleep at night and feeling incredibly lonely without him. Mrs. Bennett prayed to God to help her overcome her loneliness, and a few days ago, she found a kitten on her doorstep. She saw it as a sign and took it everywhere she went. However, this afternoon, while on a walk, the kitten, whom she named Amigo, jumped out of her arms and ran away. Mrs. Bennett spent the whole evening searching for Amigo, but returned home exhausted and unsure of what to do next. At night, when she couldn't sleep again, she heard meowing from outside. When she went out, she realized the kitten was up on the tree. That's when she knocked on Tom's door. She told him that she had seen him a couple of times and knew that he would probably be home. Tom explained he left home early and came back late. That was his routine. "All right, Mrs. Bennett, I better get going. Gotta get some sleep. I'm tired. Had a busy day." Tom sighed heavily and got up. "Thank you so much for your kindness, Tom. Drop by sometimes. We're neighbors after all." Mrs. Bennett smiled. "I will." As Tom went out and walked over to his apartment door, a cab pulled over to Mrs. Bennett's house. He opened his apartment door and went inside. It felt suspicious because Mrs. Bennett didn't mention she was expecting any guests, especially this late at night. He moved the curtain to see who's getting out of the cab. It was dark outside and he couldn't really see the face, but it was clear it was a woman. She slowly limped over to Mrs. Bennett's door and knocked. A moment later, Mrs. Bennett opened and embraced the visitor. Tom realized it was someone she knew and smiled and went back to his bed. He lay in his bed trying to fall asleep. Half an hour later, a phone rang, but it was weird because his ringtone was different. He got up and went out to the hallway. The ringing was coming from the pocket of his jacket. Tom completely forgot that he had brought the flip phone he had found in the backseat. The caller ID said Grandma. Tom hesitated before picking up, but then he decided to talk. "Hello?" Tom said. "Hi, sir. I'm sorry for calling you this late at night. My granddaughter left her phone in your cab. Could you bring it to the address I will give you? We'll pay for the delivery, sir." An old lady said on the phone. Strangely, her voice sounded so familiar. "Yeah, sure. I can do that, but I'm already home. Can I deliver the phone to you tomorrow?" Tom asked. "That's not a problem at all. Thank you, sir," he heard on the other end. "All right, let me grab a pen." As Tom listened to the old lady dictate the address, he realized it was actually not far from where he lived. But when she gave him the full address, he was shocked that it was actually next door to him. He hung up the phone and couldn't believe it. He laughed at first, but then it dawned on him. He quickly got dressed and walked outside. He ran to Mrs. Bennett's door and knocked. Natalie and Mrs. Bennett were having warm tea and conversing. "Oh wow, that was pretty fast," Natalie noted when she heard the knock on the door. "Grandma said that it must be someone else." "The cab driver said he was coming tomorrow though," she said and headed for the door. When Mrs. Bennett saw Tom smiling at the door, she was surprised. "Hey Tom, come on in. I thought it was the cab driver delivering Natalie's phone," she said. Tom didn't say anything. He just stood there barely holding his grin. As they walked to the living room, Mrs. Bennett shouted, "Honey, I want you to meet Tom, the handsome man that I told you about. He got the Amigo from the tree for me not long ago." Tom and Natalie exchanged glances and smiled at each other. Mrs. Bennett appeared perplexed as she observed them. "Is there a problem? Did I say something inappropriate?" she asked, wearing a puzzled expression. Tom reached into his pocket and retrieved Natalie's phone. "Here you go. Don't want you losing your things. Who knows, next time I might not be your driver," he quipped with a chuckle. As Tom spoke, Mrs. Bennett suddenly realized that the cab driver Natalie had mentioned earlier was actually Tom himself. She was taken aback by this revelation. Tom and Natalie both laughed and glanced over at Mrs. Bennett. Following their amusing discoveries, they all sat and conversed for another 2 hours, enveloped in a welcoming and amicable ambience. As Tom sat in Mrs. Bennett's snug abode, filled with family photos and impeccably organized surroundings, he was overcome by a newfound sense of warmth in his heart. It was an emotion unlike any he had ever experienced before. Tom gazed into Natalie's bright, sparkling eyes. She noticed his gaze and returned a smile. As he reflected on her words, he realized that the future held limitless possibilities for him, as long as he possessed a fervent passion for achieving his goals. During times of sadness and despondency, Tom turned to God for solace and comfort. Now he was grateful to have gained 2 new friends. "Alright, you two, I'm feeling quite tired. I'm gonna head to hay now. Good night," Mrs. Bennett announced with a yawn before making her way to her bedroom. Her brief message was the only thing she uttered before retiring for the night. Tom attempted to ease the tension by inquiring about Natalie's baby. "She's quite active. Her kicks are really strong," Natalie replied, flashing a smile. However, Tom suddenly became lost in thought, pondering who the father of the baby might be. Uncertain if Natalie had a family or a significant other, Tom harbored a secret hope. Without warning, Natalie addressed Tom's thoughts directly. "You're likely wondering about the father, huh?" she remarked, meeting Tom's gaze. Tom remained silent, simply staring back at her. Natalie shared that her life story was quite fascinating. She revealed that she had dated a man who turned out to be a drug dealer, but she was unaware of it. One day, the police raided their place, and the man escaped and never returned. Despite her claims of innocence, she was convicted of drug dealing and sent to prison. However, she was released early due to new evidence. She was already pregnant with her ex-boyfriend's child by that time, but had never seen him again. When she got out of the prison, some people approached her with a check, claiming it was from her ex-boyfriend, and asked her to stay quiet and move on with her life. "Is that why you had to go to the bank?" Tom asked. "Yep," she replied. "No wonder you forgot your phone," Tom joked. "I knew you would say that, but no, he didn't give me millions. I didn't really expect a lot either. You know, I was actually content with what I had in my belly." Natalie smiled and softly rubbed her belly. "Where are your parents?" Tom asked. "No idea. They left me at the orphanage when I was like 10 months old," she said. Tom was taken aback by this sudden revelation. He felt like there were too many unexpected developments for one day. He said he better go get some sleep and leave some room for revelations tomorrow. Tom woke up at noon to a knock on his door, where he found Mrs. Bennet bringing in some pancakes Natalie had made earlier. While they ate, Mrs. Bennet shared with Tom that Natalie used to live in the building's apartments and had no parents, so she was drawn to them. Tom's loneliness had disappeared entirely. He felt that God had blessed him with so many people in just one day. He wasn't upset about not having a job. Instead, he felt grateful for everything he had. Tom cared for Natalie until she gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. When they were deciding on names, Tom suggested Destiny, and they all loved it. Tom did everything he could to help, from running errands to taking care of the household. He worked as a delivery man for a courier company, which was enough to get by. Tom didn't need much, as he was content just spending time with his dear neighbors. Tom and Natalie had been in a relationship for 6 months now, and their daughter Destiny was growing up quickly. Tom couldn't believe that he had gotten everything he had wished for. Eventually, he decided to propose to Natalie, and they got married. They didn't have a grand wedding celebration, but they drove up to the mountains with Mrs. Bennet accompanying them and had a lovely, intimate event. Several years had passed, and now Destiny was a little girl who could walk and play on her own. One day, Tom and Natalie were sitting on a bench discussing what to name their son, while Destiny played in the sandbox nearby. Suddenly, a man wearing a suit and sunglasses walked up to her, trying not to attract attention. "Hey there, little one. Can I play with you?" the man asked as he approached Destiny. She looked up at him and handed him a toy truck. Natalie and Tom remained cautious as the man played with Destiny in the sandbox without saying a word. They assumed he was just another parent at the park. However, the man eventually stood up and approached their bench, where he stopped and gazed at Natalie. "Can I help you?" Tom asked. "Tom, right? Nice to meet you." The man shook his hand. He then removed his sunglasses, and Natalie was surprised to see that it was her former boyfriend. "I know what you had to go through because of me," Cyril said. "Thank you for keeping the baby," he said, and asked Tom to step aside. "You did a great job. In the world I come from, that earns you respect. See, I'm not a perfect person. I'm not proud of the things I've done, but I've always been grateful for the blessings that come my way," Cyril said. After that, Cyril handed Tom an envelope and, without any further words, left. The envelope bore the message, "Wishing you all the best, thank you, and good luck." Tom hesitated for a moment before opening the envelope, only to find a check worth $100,000 inside. Tom returned to Natalie with the envelope and gave it to her, and she was in disbelief. She hadn't anticipated or desired this outcome, but now she was content with how things had turned out. Tom worked tirelessly as a delivery man for 5 years without ever complaining. His boss appreciated his work ethic and called him into his office one day to express his admiration. He said, "Tom, I've seen many people come and go, but you've been with us for nearly 5 years. I've never heard you ask for a raise or promotion." Tom smiled and replied, "Thank you, sir. I enjoy what I do here, and I'm grateful for what I'm earning." The boss took off his glasses and asked, "Tom, would you like to try management? I need hardworking people like you in the department." "I don't mind at all, sir. I will do my best." Tom was walking through the hallway, a big smile on his face. The next day he was sitting in his office when a man walked in. The man said he was sent from the hiring department and explained that he had recently been transferred from a different branch and was now one of the truck drivers. Tom looked at the man and asked to fill out the form. 5 minutes later, the man handed back the form. Tom read the last name and looked at the man. Mr. Garcia? Is that you? Tom was surprised. I'm sorry, do I know you? Mr. Garcia asked. I've worked under your supervision as a cab driver, remember? Tom reminded him. When Mr. Garcia remembered who Tom was, he felt bad for what he had done before. He told Tom that the company's president, Mr. Wilson, had noticed that Mr. Garcia was firing many people just to impress him, and that's why he got fired too. I'm really sorry, Tom. I was being a jerk, and I hope you're not still mad at me, Mr. Garcia said in an apologetic tone. No, sir, not at all. I may have lost something, but I gained something bigger, Tom replied with a positive attitude. After the conversation, Mr. Garcia learned that Tom had been promoted to a higher position in the company and was now in charge of the department where Mr. Garcia was working. Initially, Mr. Garcia felt uneasy about the situation, considering his past behavior towards Tom. However, he decided to put his best foot forward and work hard to make things right. Tom, on the other hand, had no ill feelings towards Mr. Garcia and was willing to give him a chance to prove himself. He recognized that everyone makes mistakes and believed that people can change for the better. Tom was also impressed by Mr. Garcia's willingness to take responsibility for his actions and his sincere apology. Tom and Natalie were grateful to have Mrs. Bennett in their lives. Although she had never had children of her own, she doted on her grandchildren and treated Tom and Natalie as if they were her own children. The family was united in their love and support for each other.
Kelly Simpson couldn't believe what she had just heard. Standing at the entrance to the basement, her hands were trembling. There's no way anyone will find out about this place. Eric's voice echoed through the hallway, followed by the soft, affectionate voice of a young woman. Kelly's heart sank. She could feel her pulse racing in her ears as her thoughts spiraled. Her husband was cheating on her, right in the basement of their brand new home. She had always felt that something was off with Eric lately. He had been coming home later and showing little interest in her. But hearing it with her own ears, the laughter, the whispers, the unmistakable intimacy, it was like a punch to the gut. I love you, Eric, the young woman cooed, her voice dripping with affection. Kelly squeezed her eyes shut, barely holding back the tears. How had it come to this? Her dream home, her dream marriage, shattered. The voices inside the basement sounded carefree and oblivious, as if they were in their own little world. Kelly took a deep breath and tried to think. She couldn't stay here, frozen with shock. She needed a plan. Slowly, she turned and tiptoed away from the basement door, closing it quietly behind her. She had to decide what to do next, but her thoughts were a jumble. Should she confront Eric now, or should she wait? Should she let the whole world know what kind of man Eric really was? The pain of betrayal weighed heavily on her chest. Kelly needed a moment to collect herself. She sat down on the couch in the living room, her mind drifting back to when they first met. She was 31, working at a small web production company and loving every minute of it. Her colleagues were lively, supportive, and around her age, which made work enjoyable. It was during this time that she met Eric, the man who swept her off her feet. He had seemed perfect, charming, ambitious, and well off. His family owned a major trading company, and he was the heir to it all. He had big dreams, and Kelly thought she would be by his side through everything. Their romance had progressed quickly. They met at a mixer, hit it off right away, and 2 years later, they were married. Eric designed their dream home from scratch, a beautiful house that seemed like it was pulled straight out of a magazine. It was less than a year into their marriage when Eric proposed building the house. Kelly had hesitated at first. It seemed too soon, but Eric was insistent, saying he wanted a home like the one he grew up in. He had always wanted to own a house before turning 30, and Kelly wanted to support his dream. As they planned the house together, Eric had been particularly enthusiastic about including a basement. Kelly found it odd, but Eric brushed it off, saying it would be practical for storage or even as an emergency space. Eventually, she agreed. It was his dream home after all, and she was happy to let him take the lead in designing it. Now, she regretted that decision. That basement, the one Eric had insisted on, was where he had chosen to betray her. Kelly shook her head, trying to pull herself out of her daze. She couldn't sit here forever, drowning in her misery. She needed to act. Her mind went to their families, Eric's parents, her own parents. Everyone was so proud of them, of the life they were building together. They deserved to know the truth. The anger that bubbled up inside her helped to push aside the sadness, even if only for a moment. She grabbed her phone and made a decision. She would expose Eric for who he really was. She called her parents first, then Eric's parents. She even called Eric's aunt and uncle, who lived nearby. "I'd love for you all to come see the new house," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Eric and I are settling in, and it would mean a lot to us if you could come by today." Everyone agreed enthusiastically. They had all been eager to see the finished home. Kelly hung up and exhaled. She had set the stage. Now it was just a matter of waiting. She knew it wouldn't be long before they arrived. In the meantime, she needed to prepare herself. She went back to the basement door and listened. The voices had quieted down. She heard faint laughter and the creak of the bed. Her chest tightened, and she forced herself to take a step back. She would wait until everyone was here. Soon enough, the doorbell rang. Kelly opened the door to find her parents, Eric's parents, and his aunt and uncle standing there, smiles on their faces. "Welcome!" She greeted them warmly, hiding the turmoil beneath her cheerful exterior. "Come in, come in!" The family members marveled at the house as Kelly led them from room to room. They complimented the design, the decor, everything. Kelly forced herself to smile and nod, though her mind was on what lay beneath them. When they reached the first floor again, Eric's uncle spoke up. "Didn't Eric mention something about a special room in this house? A basement, wasn't it?" "Yes, he did," Eric's aunt added with a laugh. "He seemed very proud of it." Kelly's smile tightened. "That's right," she said. "Eric was very particular about the basement. Why don't we all take a look?" She gestured for them to follow her. Her heart pounded in her chest as they descended the stairs. She could hear the faint sound of movement from the other side of the door. She paused, her hand on the doorknob, and looked back at the group of family members, all curious and unsuspecting. "Here it is," Kelly said, her voice steady. She turned the key in the lock and flung the door open. The scene inside was worse than she had imagined. Eric was lying in bed with a young woman, both of them clearly startled by the sudden intrusion. The woman's eyes widened in shock, and she quickly pulled the blanket up to cover herself. Eric, on the other hand, looked completely caught off guard, his face turning pale as he recognized the faces staring back at him. What is this?" Eric's father stammered, his eyes wide with disbelief. The room was filled with stunned silence. The young woman, her face flushed, tried to hide behind Eric, who seemed to be at a loss for words. Kelly took a deep breath, her eyes locked on Eric. "This is what you've been doing, Eric? On the day we're moving into our new home?" Her voice was calm, but the anger beneath it was unmistakable. Eric tried to stammer out an explanation, but his father cut him off. "Eric, what on earth do you think you're doing?" His father's voice was filled with fury. "And who is this?" The young woman looked terrified, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. I didn't know he was married," she said in a small voice, but Kelly could tell it was a lie. She had seen the way the woman looked at her when the door opened. She knew. Eric's mother stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. "Eric, how could you do this? To Kelly, to all of us. You have disgraced this family." Kelly felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. This was it. This was the moment Eric's perfect image shattered. He had always been so proud of his family's wealth and status, always talking about how he would take over his father's company one day. Now, that dream was slipping through his fingers. Eric's father turned to Kelly, his expression softening. "Kelly, I am so sorry," he said, his voice filled with regret. "You deserve better than this." Kelly nodded, her eyes stinging with tears. I thought today was the start of a happy life for us, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I see now that it was all a lie. She turned to Eric, her eyes filled with pain. I loved you, Eric. I believed in you. But I won't let you make a fool of me any longer. Eric's face crumpled, and he reached out to her. Kelly, please. But she stepped back, shaking her head. No, Eric. It's over. You made your choice. Now you have to live with it. Eric's father stepped forward, his face stern. You will leave this house, Eric, and you will no longer be part of Simpson Corporation. I can't trust someone like you to run this company. Eric's eyes widened, and he looked at his father in disbelief. Dad, please, don't do this. I can fix this. I can make it right. But his father shook his head. No, Eric. You had your chance, and you threw it away. You have no one to blame but yourself. The young woman, still hiding behind Eric, looked terrified. What about me? She asked in a small voice. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Eric's father looked at her, his expression cold. You will also leave. You are fired from Simpson Corporation effective immediately. There is no place for someone like you in our company. The woman gasped, her face turning pale. Please, no. I need this job. Enough, Eric's father said sharply. You both need to leave. Now. Kelly watched as Eric and the young woman gathered their things, their faces filled with shame. She felt a sense of satisfaction as they hurried out of the house, their heads down. They were finally gone. Eric's mother turned to Kelly, tears in her eyes. Kelly, I am so sorry for everything, she said, her voice trembling. You have always been a wonderful daughter-in-law, and you didn't deserve this. Kelly nodded, her heart heavy. Thank you, she said softly. I think it's time for me to move on. Eric's father stepped forward, his expression filled with regret. Kelly, if there's anything we can do, financially, emotionally, please let us know. We will support you in any way we can. Kelly looked at the people around her, the family she had hoped to be a part of forever. She could see the pain in their eyes, the disappointment. I appreciate that, she said, but I think it's best if I start fresh, away from all of this. The following weeks were a whirlwind of emotions. Kelly and Eric finalized their divorce, and she moved out of the house. Eric, now disinherited and unemployed, was left to deal with the consequences of his actions. The young woman who had been with him also left, realizing that Eric was no longer the wealthy heir she had hoped for. Kelly found a small rental apartment, cozy and perfect for starting over. She filled it with her favorite furniture, pieces that brought her comfort and joy. Slowly, she began to rebuild her life. Her colleagues at work were supportive, giving her the space she needed while also helping her stay busy. She even found herself smiling again, enjoying the freedom of being on her own. One day, as she was walking home from work, she met someone, a kind, gentle man who made her laugh and who seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her. They started spending time together, and for the first time in a long time, Kelly felt hopeful about the future. She knew she wasn't ready to jump into anything serious just yet. But she also knew that she deserved to be happy, to be with someone who valued and respected her. And if she ever decided to marry again, she would make sure that they built their life together on a foundation of trust and love, a true partnership. As she sat in her new apartment, sipping a cup of tea, Kelly looked around and smiled. This was her space, her life. She was no longer living in the shadow of Eric's lies. She was free to be herself, to find her own happiness, and to create the future she deserved.
Little Ellen had an exhilarating few weeks, as her long-awaited wish was about to come true. The orphanage was abuzz with excitement as a couple was visiting to adopt 2 kids. Despite being sent to the backyard to calm down by her teacher, Ellen couldn't help but ask the orphanage staff if she would be adopted. The director and teachers were busy preparing for the couple's visit, determined not to make any mistakes in front of influential parents. The Atkins were an older couple, with Tyra being 45 and Josh being over 50. They never had children during their 20-year marriage, as they focused on their careers first. After realizing they couldn't conceive naturally, they tried different treatments before deciding to adopt a child. Being millionaires through their construction business, they could afford it. During their first visit to the orphanage, they were immediately drawn to a 6-year-old girl with brown hair and dark chocolate eyes, who was laughing next to a tall boy that she followed everywhere. Tyra admired the girl's innocence and beauty. "She looks so much like you with your eyes and hair color," said Tyra to Josh. He responded with a smile, saying that her laughter was as contagious as hers and suggested they get to know the baby better. While preparing the necessary paperwork, the family visited the orphanage multiple times to bond with the little girl they planned to adopt. On their second visit, Josh grew attached to a boy whom the girl was always with. Josh was delighted to have a son who could carry on the family business and provide support. The boy's name was Alex, and the orphanage staff shared the backstory of their friendship. 6 years ago, a baby girl was left at an orphanage door during a spring rainstorm. The director named her Ellen, meaning shining light. Despite growing up without parental love, Ellen was kind and had impressive mental abilities by age 5. In the same year, a 9-year-old boy named Alex, who had a dysfunctional family, became friends with Ellen at the orphanage. Despite being withdrawn and unsociable, Alex defended Ellen and cared for her while she brightened his life with her kindness. The Atkins liked the children very much. "So you're not afraid to take us to your place? People take kids like us for a while and then return them back, saying they didn't fit in," Ellen said. Alex's eyes were also filled with apprehension as he waited for Tyra's response. Tyra's face softened and she reassured them. "No, my dears, you're not some kind of toys that can be returned. You're living beings and we would never do that to you. If you want us to be your parents, we will take you to our home. So, would you like that?" Ellen nodded eagerly without hesitation, and Alex's smile finally broke through his nervousness, warming Tyra's heart. "I promise Josh and I will do everything we can to make you the happiest children," Tyra whispered, tears of joy filling her eyes. Eventually, the day arrived when Ellen's adoptive parents came to take her home, and she eagerly awaited their arrival in the garden, wearing her best dress and gathering her few possessions. "Ellen, are you ready? It's time to say goodbye to everyone. They're already here." Alex's voice came from behind. The girl jumped up and turned around. "Yes, of course, brother. I'm absolutely ready. Absolutely. Everything is collected. I'm running already." Alex stopped her, ruffled her soft hair, and took her hand with a smile. "Take a deep breath and calm down. Don't run like crazy. Dad and Mom won't leave without us." The first time she heard the words Dad and Mom from her brother's lips, Ellen froze in place and stared at him with wide eyes. "Wow, we have to slowly get used to calling them that. After all, they are our parents now. Dad, Mom," Ellen muttered quietly under her breath, tasting these words. Warmth spread throughout her body, warming the girl's heart. Ellen struggled to keep up with her older brother's long strides as they walked out onto the porch. However, she suddenly stopped in shock when she saw the couple waiting for them. She quickly turned and ran back inside, leaving the Atkins confused and worried. They wondered if she didn't want to be their daughter, or if she was afraid to leave the orphanage where she had spent her entire life. Ellen returned after a while, holding something in her hands. She was blushing from grunting and excitement as she approached their new parents and presented a handmade postcard. The card had a drawing of 2 adults, a man and a woman, and 2 children, a boy and a girl, all holding hands and smiling. The bottom of the card had a message: "My family, Mom and Dad, I love you." Tyra was overwhelmed with emotions upon seeing the gift, and Josh spoke softly with a hoarse voice, saying, "We love you too. We're now a family." Ellen's departure from the orphanage was a touching event, with the staff expressing their love for her, shedding tears and wishing her happiness. Ellen hugged each of them and promised to visit when she grows up. Alex, the 10-year-old, was more reserved and quietly said goodbye, waiting for Ellen by the car with sparkling eyes and a slight blush. They all traveled to the Atkins' home in a large truck, which took them a long time. Ellen was curious about everything she saw from the window since she hadn't left the orphanage much. Tyra happily answered her questions while Josh drove.
Alex, who had gained the nickname Bookworm for reading a lot during his year at the orphanage, occasionally added comments and answered Ellen's questions. Exhausted girl rested her head on her brother's shoulder and let out a soft sniffle after a couple of hours. Meanwhile, her brother looked outside the window while gently stroking her head with one hand. Tyra watched this heartwarming scene and reflected. This is what it feels like to be a mother. As they passed through the grand wrought iron gates, Alex exclaimed in amazement, "Is this where we live?" "Like it?" Josh asked with a smile. "Your mother and I spent several years building it in order to live with you as one big family." "It's beautiful," Ellen sighed enthusiastically, looking at the huge mansion. After giving her son and daughter a loving kiss, Tyra led them into the house where they were introduced to the household staff and their nanny, Mrs. Jackson, who would be taking care of them while their parents were at work. The parents had prepared comfortable and inviting rooms for the children, complete with a variety of toys which they enjoyed playing with before settling down to do their homework. The lively and cheerful Ellen quickly won over everyone she met, using her persuasive skills to convince people to join her in various adventures. Whenever something out of the ordinary happened in the house, it was almost always due to her involvement. Alex, a serious and reserved boy, found solace in the vast library that occupied the entire attic of the house. He spent most of his time there, away from school and family. The household staff admired his intelligence and good manners, while his father, noticing his seclusion, enrolled him in sports to promote all-round development. Alex, who had not experienced paternal love and care before, adapted well to this new life and became attached to his stepfather Josh as if he were his own. The Atkins were delighted that their children had accepted them and had easily adjusted to this new life. Their lives were filled with joy and contentment, which they had never experienced before. Every day they felt grateful for having Ellen and Alex with them. 3 months post-adoption, the Atkins had a dinner to celebrate a new contract. While getting ready, Tyra couldn't find her diamond necklace, which was a gift from her husband for their 20th anniversary. She checked her dressing room, but it wasn't there. She remembered that Ellen had shown interest in her dressing room earlier. Despite her efforts to push away negative thoughts, doubts infiltrated the woman's mind and settled in, slowly gnawing away at her soul. Was it possible for the sweet child she had grown so fond of to do something wrong? Tyra had a sleepless night filled with unsettling dreams and could only doze off in the morning. She was awoken by a knock on the door and in a drowsy voice allowed Ellen to enter. The girl entered with excitement and immediately started to talk loudly. "Mommy!" exclaimed Ellen. "Happy holiday to you!" Tyra, still half asleep, was confused. "Holiday? Sweetie, what holiday?" "Happy Mother's Day," replied Ellen excitedly. "Mrs. Jackson told me about it, and I'm so happy to be able to celebrate it with you." She then presented Tyra with a small homemade box as a gift. Tyra opened the box and was shocked to see a crown-like creation with her missing necklace. She felt a mix of emotions including great relief, shame for doubting Ellen, and overwhelming affection for the innocent little girl who smiled back at her. "I saw the beautiful glitter in your room and thought that it was as beautiful as you," said Ellen. "So I decided to make a crown for you. Do you like it?" Tyra, feeling delighted, hugged Ellen tightly and whispered, "Yes, baby, I love it very much." The Atkins family enjoyed a peaceful and loving life, but as often happens, the perfect period eventually came to an end. After 10 years of blissful family life with the children, Tyra fell gravely ill, and the disease progressed rapidly. Initially, the children were unaware of the severity of their mother's illness and believed that with the right treatment, she would recover. They accepted the daily visits of the doctors without much concern. Despite her illness, their mother remained in good spirits, often engaging in lengthy conversations with her son in the evenings, while her daughter sat nearby reading her favorite books and occasionally joining in on the conversation. "How's school going, son? Is it challenging?" "Well, I doubt a genius likely would have any trouble," Mom said with a smile. "Aw, come on, Mom," Alex laughed in response. "Your father is very proud of you and brags about you to all his friends," said Tyra. "He's even preparing a place for you in his company and hopes that you will inherit his business." Ellen put down her book and replied, "I don't know about being a genius, but one thing I know for sure." Ellen jokingly complained to her mother about the attention her older brother was getting from high school girls. She showed her mother the gifts she had received from his fans, who believed that the way to get closer to him was through his little sister. Alex laughed loudly and tousled his sister's silky hair. You must be enjoying all the attention, huh? He chuckled. Alex broke the silence by looking at his mother's face, which looked pale and slightly tired, and asked a serious question. What did the doctor say about your headaches? Tyra paused for a moment before speaking slowly. Son, I may need to go to the hospital soon, but don't worry, everything will be fine. Just focus on your studies and take care of your sister. She then whispered, You know how indulgent your father is with her, letting her do whatever she wants. Ellen mumbled in a drowsy voice, I heard everything. Don't worry about me, I'm a grown-up girl now. Absolutely, you're the best and most beautiful, but it's time to go to sleep now. Mom needs more rest, Alex replied. Alex felt uneasy after talking to his mother about her illness. He couldn't shake off the feeling that it was not a typical sickness. Despite saying goodnight to his mom and sister, he couldn't sleep for a long time, pondering about it. As days went by, Tyra's health deteriorated, and doctors informed the family that there was no cure for her inoperable brain tumor. After several medical procedures, they decided to go back home and spend Tyra's remaining time with the family. Upon Mom's return home, Ellen embraced her and exclaimed, Mommy, I'm so happy you're back. You're feeling better now, right? Tyra, who looked pale and frail from her treatment and the knowledge of her diagnosis, managed to give her daughter a weak smile and said, Yes, my dear, I'm feeling much better. That's why the doctors allowed me to come back home, to be with you. Alex stood a few feet away looking at his mother with tears in his eyes. He had to try hard not to cry, and his mother looked at him with a pleading expression, shaking her head gently. Ellen, who was in her mother's arms, was unaware of the silent exchange between Alex and their mother. Josh made relentless efforts to find a way to either cure his wife or extend her life, but despite approaching various medical organizations, fate had its way, and Tyra passed away a few months later. She departed peacefully and with grace, leaving behind a final request for her husband to take care of their children after her passing, and for Alex to always support and look after his little sister. Tyra told her children to always remember the importance of family, no matter what happens. She reminded them that they may not be related by blood, but their bond as family is more valuable than shared genetics. Josh was crying and begging at the side of the bed. Please, please, my love, don't leave me, don't go. I'm not afraid to die, Tyra told her family. I've experienced the feeling of love and being loved, and the joy of being a mother. She asked her family to take her hand and stay with her until the end. Don't go, Mom, please, Alex cried out, his voice filled with desperation. But as soon as they clasped hands, his mother took her final breath, closed her eyes, and passed away to another world. Alex and Ellen experienced one of the most significant human losses, the passing of their mother. Ellen, who was raised as an orphan, encountered death for the first time. She experienced a deep ache in her heart and a sensation that an essential part of herself had shattered, leaving an emptiness that could not be filled by anything. Ellen gazed at her brother with her large brown eyes and asked, Do you think Mom is happy where she is? Alex responded tenderly, I hope she is. At least she's no longer suffering from her illness. I know that she's watching over us and always thinking of us. Therefore, we should strive to be good people. Alex lovingly touched his sister's nose, and she nestled closer to him, embracing him tightly while burying her face in his chest and weeping silently onto his shirt. Josh's business started to deteriorate, with significant deals falling through one after the other. This led to a considerable drop in the family's income. To make matters worse, Josh was completely shattered by his wife's illness and subsequent death. He increasingly turned to strong drinks to cope with his pain. Eventually, his competitors took over his business, forcing Josh and his children to relinquish their luxurious mansion. As a result, the family had to move into a small two-room apartment. The children, having already experienced the loss of their mother, took the transition in stride. Ellen enrolled in a public school, while Alex made the decision to abandon his studies and find work. Josh slowly withered away before their very eyes, unable to cope with the loss of his cherished wife and the collapse of his life's work. Frequently, when Ellen came home, she witnessed her father in a state of mental turmoil. However, she never revealed to her brother how scared and sorrowful she was to see their father in such a state. On one occasion, upon returning home, Ellen was surprised to find her father clean and sober, preparing dinner on the stove. She stood frozen in amazement at the kitchen door as she watched her father. "Dad, is that really you?" she asked in disbelief. "Sweetheart, wash your hands and take a seat at the table." we're about to eat, Josh responded warmly. Feeling bewildered, Ellen followed her father's instructions. As Josh placed a plate of vegetable stew in front of her, he coughed in embarrassment and muttered, "I wanted to make you some vegetable stew, but it seems like something went wrong." Ellen swallowed the peculiar tasting stew and replied, "It's a bit unusual, but it's actually quite tasty. I'm so grateful you made this for me. I've made a decision. Starting today, I'll cook for my precious son and daughter. I'm finished with all of this. I need to get myself together and begin a new life. Not just for myself, but for you both as well. To be honest, I've been seeing your mother in my dreams lately. She's been reproaching me for leaving you in such a desperate situation." Ellen, in tears, threw herself into the arms of her father. "Dad, I'm so glad you're back." Josh gradually regained his focus. Meanwhile, Alex was engaged in the reconstruction of the family's construction enterprise, which required a significant portion of his time as he had to travel frequently to other cities for business purposes. Ellen remained at home to look after her father and took excellent care of him. The medical professionals had warned that his prior alcohol consumption made him susceptible to heart attacks. During one of Alex's week-long business trips, Josh discovered from Ellen's classmates that she had the opportunity to go on a 2-day excursion with her class to a history museum in a large city. However, Ellen declined the offer due to her job and the belief that she needed to look after Josh. "No, Dad, I don't want to go. I'd rather stay with you until Alex gets back. Besides, that trip is going to be dull," Ellen told Josh when he suggested that she should join her classmates. "I can't leave you alone for 2 days, Dad. It's out of the question," Ellen insisted. "Sweetheart, I'll feel worse if you miss out on this opportunity. Do you have to take care of an old man at your age? You're still young. Go and have fun. Please, do it for me," Josh pleaded with Ellen. As Ellen listened to Josh's words and saw the desperation and pleading in his eyes, she finally relented for the first time. She gave him a gentle kiss on the forehead and made a promise to go. She cooked enough food for 2 days and arranged for a neighbor to check on her father from time to time. Ellen left her phone number as a precaution and departed for the trip, unaware of the tragic fate that awaited them. The family had been the victim of fate's cruel tricks on numerous occasions, and this instance was no different. If only Josh had not convinced Ellen to go on his ill-fated journey. If only Alex had purchased the plane tickets a few days earlier. If only Ellen had opted to take the morning bus back to her town, maybe none of this would have occurred. Alex returned home with a heavy heart, as he had a feeling that something was not right. Overwhelmed by a sense of impending panic, he quickly got out of the taxi and ran up the steps to the house. Upon reaching the door, he began banging on it in a desperate attempt to gain entry. Eventually, a neighbor emerged and looked at him with a sorrowful expression. Upon hearing the news of his father's passing, he became deaf to everything else except for a ringing in his ears. He was unable to articulate a response and simply stared at the neighbor in a state of shock. On the night that Ellen departed for her field trip, Josh suffered a heart attack. Ellen rushed back home, but tragically, it was the last time anyone ever heard from her. She seemed to have vanished without a trace. Alex was consumed by despair, and his heart shattered into 1,000 tiny fragments that pained him from within. He held himself responsible for everything that had happened, blaming himself for leaving his father and sister alone in such a vulnerable state. With his father and sister both gone, Alex found himself utterly alone and unsure of what to do next. Despite making numerous unsuccessful attempts to locate Ellen, he eventually resigned himself to waiting at home in the hope that she would eventually return. For 2 long months, Alex remained holed up in the house, refusing to go anywhere in case Ellen turned up. He clung to the hope that she would one day walk through the door and bring an end to the nightmare that had become his life. However, despite his unwavering faith, Ellen never showed up, leaving Alex to grapple with the crushing weight of his grief and loss. Despite the unbearable pain of losing his father and sister, Alex knew he had to find a way to move forward with his life. He threw himself into growing the family business that his late parents had left him, and with hard work and dedication, he began to gain momentum. As the business grew, Alex never forgot about his sister and the mystery of her disappearance. Determined to uncover any information he could about her whereabouts, he spared no expense in hiring the best detectives to investigate the case. Years passed with no leads, but Alex refused to give up hope. He poured all his energy and resources into the search, never losing sight of his goal of bringing his sister back home. One day, Alex's phone rang, and on the other end was a detective with promising news. "Mr. Hunter, I've located a girl named Tyra. the detective informed Alex. Tyra, that's my mother's name. My sister's name is Ellen, Alex replied, feeling frustrated as detectives often provided him with wrong leads. I believe we need to meet, sir, the detective suggested. After a few days, Alex found himself waiting in the hotel lobby for the detective, who was running late. He began to feel anxious and thought of leaving when the detective finally arrived. He was not alone. Accompanying him were an older couple. Mr. Hunter, how you doing, sir? This is Mr. and Mrs. Cooper, the detective said. During the meeting, the detective informed Alex that the Cooper family had encountered a girl named Tyra several years ago. It turned out that Tyra attended the same college as their daughter Lisa, and they had become close friends. According to Lisa, Tyra confided in her that she was suffering from amnesia and had no recollection of her past, except for the name Tyra, which she assumed was her own. Tyra went through various struggles to get out of the hospital and eventually found a job and a place to live. She decided to study neuroscience to understand what had happened to her. Lisa, her friend from college, often shared stories about her loving family. One day, Tyra jokingly asked if Lisa's parents could adopt her. She didn't need any financial support, she just longed for the feeling of having parents, something she had always wanted. Lisa wrote a post on Facebook to help Tyra find her family, and it went viral. The detective came across the post and found it suspicious. He showed Alex pictures of Tyra, and Alex was initially overwhelmed with emotion and put the pictures down. After picking them up again, he wept as he went through each photo. The Cooper family and the detective smiled in silence. It turned out that after the accident, Ellen had lost her memory and didn't remember her own identity. The only name she could recall was her mother's name, Tyra. The detective informed Alex that they could find Ellen thanks to Lisa's post. Alex called Lisa to express his gratitude, and Lisa offered to prepare a surprise birthday gift for Ellen. On Ellen's 25th birthday, Lisa extended an invitation to her to come over to her house. Tyra, I would love for you to meet my family. How about we have dinner at our place? Lisa asked Ellen. Ellen was thrilled and accepted the offer, excited at the prospect of being close to a family. When she arrived at Lisa's house, the dinner table was set and Lisa introduced her family to Ellen. Mom, Dad, this is Tyra, Lisa said as she introduced Ellen to the Cooper family. Nice to meet you, Tyra. Lisa's told us so much about you. Mrs. Cooper warmly greeted Ellen. As Lisa glanced at Alex, she noticed that he was struggling to contain his emotions. Tears had already formed in his eyes. Ellen looked at Alex and then back at Lisa, wondering who he was. Alex, you already know who this is? Lisa said, pointing at Ellen. Ellen looked even more confused. She had no idea who Alex was. Tyra, this is your brother Alex. He has been searching for you for the past 7 years. And by the way, your real name is Ellen, Lisa revealed. Alex was already in tears when he said, Hi, Ellen. When Ellen saw the pictures that Alex had shown her and heard the full story of her past, she was overwhelmed with emotion and began to cry tears of both sadness and happiness. Finally knowing the truth about her identity after all those years was a lot to take in. Alex expressed his deep gratitude to Lisa and her family for helping to find his long-lost sister. They had been reunited, and it was all thanks to Lisa's determination and kindness. After the birthday celebration, Alex drove Ellen to their childhood home, hoping that the familiar surroundings might help jog her memory. As they walked through the door, Ellen gasped at the sight of the old family photos on the walls and the familiar furniture in the living room. Memories started flooding back, and soon she was laughing and crying at the same time as she remembered all the good times they had shared as a family. The Cooper family had become Ellen's family too, and they all agreed that they were meant to find each other. As they took a family photo together, Ellen looked at her brother and said, Thank you for never giving up on me. Alex smiled and replied, Well, you didn't want to let me go since the orphanage. Thank you for being my sister.